Hello, my name is Joshua Terrell. I'm a graduate student with FIU getting my degree in network security, and today I will be reviewing the article Overview of Digital Forensics and Anti-Forensics Techniques that's taken from the 2020 8th International Symposium on Digital Forensics and Security. It's written by Hassan Mahad et al. I titled this presentation as a game of chess because that's really what it is when you look at digital forensics techniques and the anti-forensic techniques that are developing. But first we need a little bit of context. We live in what is known as today the digital age. There are 19.8 billion IoT devices worldwide, and that number is expected by many to double to over 40 billion in 2034. But why are all these digital devices? Well, the explosion of devices is driven by data and the capability that data has to make people's lives more efficient, easier, and more interconnected. From lawnmowers, ovens, refrigerators, parking lots, and even tsunami predictors, IoT and data is defining this current age. So what does this have to do exactly with digital forensics? Well, if there were no digitized data, there would of course be no need for digital forensics. But let me give you a quick overview of what the next several minutes will look like as we define our terms, understand the context for digital forensics and anti-forensics techniques, and then we will look at both the use cases and techniques for digital forensics and anti-forensics and have an idea of the state of the art or where we are today. But first, what is digital forensics? This is something that has been in use for over 40 years now. In fact, the FBI began training law enforcement officers on retrieving evidence from computers in the mid-1980s. In 2005, I believe it was, Ken Zatieko, the former director of the Defense Computer Forensics Laboratory, defined digital forensics like this. It's the application of computer science and investigative procedures for a legal purpose involving the analysis of digital evidence, information of probative value that is stored or transmitted in binary form, after proper search authority, chain of custody, validation with mathematics or hash functions, use of validated tools, repeatability, reporting, and possible expert presentation. Now that is a mouthful. And what does that exactly mean? Well, that could be summed up as the application of computer science and investigative procedures for legal purposes involving digital evidence. Nowadays, this definition is expanded a little bit more to be used beyond legal purposes. For example, large corporations might have their own digital forensics teams to restore data that may have been accidentally deleted, or to conduct investigations that may not have legal repercussions, but would have repercussions inside of that corporation as a whole. So that gives us a little picture of what digital forensics is. What do we mean when we talk about anti-forensics? So anti-forensics, as maybe you can come up with yourself from the name, is the study and use of tools and techniques that target the usefulness of digital evidence, the usefulness of using digital evidence to create reasonable doubt regarding that evidence's validity. In other words, anti-forensics is the attempt of a user for possibly malicious or non-malicious intentions to invalidate some sort of evidence. This could be done through manipulating logs. This could be done through manipulating metadata about a file itself. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in thinking about that. We want to first focus, really the bulk of this presentation will be about digital forensics. So let's start there. Now, as I mentioned already, digital forensics kind of was birthed out of legal proceedings. There's a famous case in the 1980s that involved a Pennsylvania banker's wife being kidnapped. There was a Forensics Files episode about it, actually, and they used data on the suspect's computer to confirm that he was indeed the kidnapper and eventually the killer, as they found the plans that he had typed up and stored on his hard drive with this crime. So there's a lot of use for digital forensics in the criminal sphere of things. This last bullet point of physical crimes, it kind of covers what I was just talking about. These are often related to murders or violence against other people, but it has other use cases as well. One of the biggest is in cybercrime. Things like hacking, ransomware, and malware incidents. These are criminal activities, and if caught, the perpetrator will be punished under the law. It's often used in child exploitation cases. Digital forensics has been huge in finding people who are guilty of distributing or collecting child pornography or other ways to abuse children. And so the growth of this discipline is really important to helping us have a safer digital ecosystem. And then finally, it also helps detect fraud. Using digital forensics techniques, you can identify people who have defrauded others, possibly through identity theft or tax evasion. In criminal investigations, it's often said to follow the money, and digital forensics is a big part of what that looks like today. But digital forensics is not only applicable in the criminal sphere. As I mentioned earlier, there's a growing need for digital forensics analysts in the corporate world. And so this could deal with internal investigations that might cover unauthorized data access. So people, even if you're part of a corporation, doesn't mean you have access to everything. And a lot of intellectual property theft can be the cause of a loss of billions of dollars for large corporations. And so if data is being leaked, it becomes very important for an organization to know why it's being leaked, how it's being leaked, and what they can do to prevent this. And so digital forensics plays a huge role in tracking kind of the pathway of the data. Why did this file reach this network? And so you need specialists for that. There are, I guess, also violations of authorized use policy. If people are spending too much time on YouTube instead of working, a forensics analyst can pull logs from a web server or a proxy server and aggregate that information to help an organization make sure they're running an efficient workforce, because people should not be using company time to accomplish corporate or personal tasks, excuse me. And then even employee misconduct. So if someone is harassing another employee or worse, maybe manipulating them or blackmailing them, the digital forensics techniques and ability to examine their web activity, their browser history can be very important to stop that kind of misuse. This is kind of a subset of the corporate application of digital forensics, but in incident response, it's really important to be able to forensically analyze data. This is useful for breach analysis. So if your company is breached, you probably want to know how that happened, because you certainly do not want that to happen again. And then one step further, you also probably want to know who did this. So that would fall under threat attribution. Who can we attribute this threat to? Who can we attribute this breach to, so that they don't continue to perpetuate crime? And then finally, it's hugely important with malware analysis. Let's say that there is some live malware on your system. Well, of course, you could quarantine that, you could shut down your systems, But it would also be helpful to get a understanding of what this malware is actually doing. Not all malware is created equal. Not all of it is as harmful, and some of it is really the only time you can get an accurate picture of what it's doing is when it is live. And so you might want to, in the early stages of incident response, have a skilled forensics analyst to analyze that binary data and the malware as it is running in order to help your organization cope from the loss and recover some of their data. And then finally, and this is a big one, is in government and intelligence. There is a huge need for this. I'm sure you guys have all heard about the ways that Russia and China interfere with our government, with our critical infrastructure. And so there's a need for forensics analysts to be able to understand how they are impacting our national security, be able to understand in what ways are we being digitally surveyed, and how can we leverage our own technical expertise to accomplish these same objectives against nation state actors who are our enemies. So it kind of goes both ways. There's a blue team and a red team to this, and we need the intelligence community and the government to be able to apply cutting edge digital forensics techniques to understand kind of where we are being hit and then how to hit back. And we might not, love to acknowledge it, but there is certainly espionage that is taking place on both sides. There are spies, there are people who are using the internet, people who are using their cyber resources to harm other nation states. And you do not want to be on the receiving side of that, and you want to make sure that your country is well protected. And then finally on this slide, I want to highlight the border security and how digital forensics is actually being applied here to look at people's devices when they enter our country, to assess their, potential criminality, to see what kind of contacts they have, to be able to pull the hard drive and the memory for mobile devices and analyze what is this person's goal and what kind of baggage might they be bringing in. Baggage applies, far beyond now just the physical belongings. You have to think about it in a digital sense as well in the 21st century. So this is just kind of a summary of the tools and techniques and some of the softwares. Disk imaging is probably the most important one. In digital forensics, we talk about the chain of custody, and you do not want that chain to be broken. And you also never want to analyze the original source. It's similar to other forensics techniques in law enforcement. You don't want to really mess up any part of the crime scene or tamper with evidence, and the same goes with digital evidence. So the first and most important step really is disk imaging, making a bit-by-bit copy of the original disk. And then from there, there's all sorts of techniques and tools you would use on that disk. File carving is something that extracts files based on their file signatures, even if the system metadata is missing or detected. So this is great for recovering deleted files and fragmented data. The data recovery can involve getting corrupted data from digital media. The metadata analysis is helpful to understand when a file was created, when was it modified, who is the user that created this, or even hidden attributes. This is great for timeline analysis, which can help reconstruct the history of a file. Maybe it got renamed as a .dat file, and when really it is a picture, and you wouldn't be able to see the picture opening it as a data file. And so there's all these different things that are necessary, keyword searching, memory analysis, and the list goes on. So what are some of the tools and software that's used for this? Well, one that I've been using personally is the Autopsy/Sleuth Kit, and this is super helpful to analyze a disk, to take that bit by bit copy and open it in something like Autopsy, which can reconstruct what that looked like, and you can use all sorts of keyword searching, flagging, etc., to get a good idea of the evidence. There's also the FTK, or Forensic Toolkit, that is helpful as well for analyzing disks, emails, file systems, etc. And then finally, Volatility is a tool, an open source memory analysis tool for specifically mainly used for malware and injected code. The list goes on. This is not here to provide a comprehensive list, but just to give a flavor of some of the things that you can actually do with digital forensics tools and techniques. Okay, so finally, what are these anti-forensic tools and techniques? Now, I spent a lot more time talking about digital forensics tools and techniques because without understanding much about digital forensics, you'll have a very poor understanding of anti-forensics and why it matters. So this is kind of a newer branch of study, you could say, that's cropped up as a response to digital forensics. And some of the key things here are artifact wiping. And I want to stay on this for a little bit. What is artifact wiping? Well, this could look like wiping a file. You may or may not know this, but when you delete a file from your computer, especially if it's a Windows system, it doesn't really get deleted. It will disassociate the memory location from the file that was there, but you can use more comprehensive methods like file wiping to destroy the data that's associated with a specific file by randomly generating new data to overwrite that. You can do that with whole disks and partitions to quickly destroy all the data that resides on the sectors of a specified disk or partition. There is registry wiping, because even if you do, fully wipe a file, it's still possible there will be registry entries, or there will be registry entries on a Windows machine, indicating that this software, this file did used to exist. So you might want to be more thorough and do registry wiping, and then metadata manipulation is super helpful if you don't want to someone to understand, get that timeline analysis. When was something created and what was it? You could manipulate the metadata, and that would be a tool that if you were into the anti-forensic stuff, which you probably don't want to be in, it's most of the time associated with criminal activity, but it's something to be aware of, that this metadata could be manipulated. And then other tools and techniques would be data hiding, or this can look like steganography, encryption, manipulating a file system. There's trail obfuscation, manipulating logs. This is surprisingly easy to do and very effective to remove entries from syslog. You can spoof your IP address. If you use peer-to-peer networking, it can be a lot harder to find the original source of this malware or software that you don't want to be found. And so there's all these new tools and techniques that are being propped up. And so that's why when I started this presentation, I mentioned that it's a game of chess, because it's a cat and mouse situation, really. And this chess match will continue as there are more ways to forensically analyze data. There will be more ways to get around that. And so there's this principle of escalation and evolution that will always happen. I think especially in the criminal world, people are always trying to find ways to get around getting caught. It's part of their self-interest. So where does that leave us? It's impossible to memorize, every possible way to counter an anti-forensics attack, but it does remind us of the necessity to stay relevant, to keep reading, to keep researching, to stay up to date on ways that criminals can get around your best efforts, and then cutting edge ways for you as a digital forensics analyst to be able to properly extract and examine all the data that you need for lawful and rightful purposes. Thank you.